Hello, we're live for a tone science, composer roundtable, producer chat, promo video, whatever you want to call this thing, with Ian Boddy from Din and a few of the artists, including myself, which is nice, rather than me just talking about this kind of thing with others, to talk about tone science and the first compilation release. We'll quickly run down who's on the panel. We'll go down in order. So, Robin, Scanner, how are you?
I'm very well, just back from New Zealand.
Yeah.
I have a suntan, which may not come across with the light at this time of the evening, but nice and busy, lots of projects happening, no Easter holiday because I'm work, but I love it. So I'm quite happy.
Yeah, for anyone, I'm sure people have seen you on these shows before. We've had you on various things, probing you with questions, but for anyone that's potentially new to you or your work, what would you say that it is you do?
I'm a composer. I make work. I write film soundtracks, pieces for contemporary dance. I've got a piece this week in London at the Hayward Gallery with London Sinfonietta, a live concert. I'm writing a film score for a film that opens at the Cannes Film Festival. I do things like that. I make some things that people may not realize I've done, like ringtones, alarm clock sounds, those kind of things. So I like to invade other people's worlds without them knowing, sonically.
Nice, good. That's great to actually have a kind of little intro. I do get called out for presuming people are aware of who we are and what we're doing.
Who are these dudes?
Calling me out all the time. Yeah, voice you just heard, Nigel, how are you?
Yes, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, glad to be back in the grid. So just had an afternoon of repatching and recabling, which is always fun. So yeah, just got back from Ian's new little studio. It's very good, very creative. It's always difficult when you change, when somebody changes their environment, but it was fantastic. Went in, everything was just the same. So I've had an afternoon of getting all this lot back together again. Lots of projects on. Yeah, very, very good. Very excited about the tone science project.
Composer.
Shameless plug.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing is.
Yeah.
Composer, producer.
Composer, producer, songwriter, engineer, bit of everything really. So yes, doing an album with Ian for a music production label, and that's very good. Also got 5 or 6 different projects on the go at the moment. A lot of people may have seen the 31-day challenge that I did in January. There's 2 or 3 projects bubbling away on that. So yeah, lots and lots of exciting things going on. It's all good.
It's 31 days in January. It's 31 days in January, Nigel, not 13.
yeah, 31-day challenge.
You said 13.
Did I really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, it was exhausting to me. I'm still getting over it, you know.
That 31-day challenge, it was really appealing, and I was way too late to try and do it. It was sort of 15, 16 days in. I thought, I should have done this. This would have been cool. Basically making a track or mini track or whatever, one a day all of January, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of really interesting because I adopted the same discipline that I'd applied when I was doing the track that got selected for the Tone Science album. It was basically all modular, something kind of different. Record it, arrange it, program it, patch it, do everything in one take, record it onto a 2-track master, and that's it. Step away from it. You know, no messing around. Because my issue is it's always taking a step back from a track, saying that that's finished. So it's always been I often tend to overproduce things and oversaturate things. And a lot of that is being tied into writing music for TV and film. You're very much locked into writing for a brief. The wonderful thing about modular music is it takes you out of those patterns. So it inspires creativity and it pushes you in a different direction just with one, control source, one turn of a knob, and you're kind of off in a different area. And that kind of led me to think about, would it be possible for me to write 31 pieces, a track a day in January, and actually work through until I'd finished it off? And yeah, it was a heck of a challenge. I won't be doing it next year, but it was good. It was good. I ended up with just under 5 hours worth of music, and some of it has really surprised me. Some of it is, I'm very pleased with.
I've got it all on my hard disk drive.
Yeah.
Who knows where it'll be?
I wonder.
Continuing on, a couple more guests. Matthew, Shaw, internet, well, might as well say now, internet failing us your end, so we'll apologise in advance if you drop out. How are you?
Yeah, not bad, apart from my rural strength internet made out of straw and potatoes, I think. Yeah, so I've just relocated to a rural idle location, studio, if you like. So I've just been doing what Ian's been doing, where I'm again here. So it just takes 5 times longer than what you anticipated it to do.
Yeah, actually moved the room around.
Just about got everything working.
And the most important thing is you've got the disco lights up. I can see those at the back, so that's really cool.
Yeah, that's about the only thing that is kind of fully connected at the moment. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to kind of...
Matthew, we've lost you.
We don't know what you're looking forward to.
Looking forward to nothing because you cut out.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the new place and the new direction it'll take me.
Yeah, and internet as well at some point.
Yeah, and yeah.
Moving on.
Full fat internet.
Yeah, moving on. Head honcho, I guess, for this.
No.
In.
No pleasure then.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine. As Matt was saying there as well, I've been moving my studio, which is an immense undertaking. First time in 5 years I've moved it. I certainly don't want to move it again in 5 years. So I've got the surgeon behind me. So as long as that all's working, everything else is fine. So it's all here and working. And Nigel was down here last week, and we spent 2 days working on a project for DeWolf. And the professionals that we are, we just forged ahead, and 4 tracks appeared. So if it's all working, it's all working. It's good. Yeah.
Well, we should say at this point, seeing as this is what we're all here for, what's tone science? If you want to give us a quick rundown before we get into this specific compilation.
What is tone science? Well, for those who don't know, I, amongst other things, which include sound design for sample library companies and TV and documentary and film soundtracks that I do, I run an ambient electronic label called DIN, which I've been doing since 1999. In fact, I've been involved with electronic music per se since probably 1978, when I discovered a studio in Newcastle upon Tyne called Spectral Arts Workshop, which unfortunately is no longer there. It's now a car park, which is a tragic thing. And when I walked in there in 1978, although you can't see it just out of shot on the left here, one of the things I had in that studio was a VCS3. And I'd never seen a VCS3. I never heard of a VCS3. I didn't even know how to turn one on. But once I did figure out how it worked, I thought, this sounds pretty cool. And I haven't stopped since. So those old-fashioned kind of vintage synthesizers I've always used, as I said, right the way back to 1978. But as we all know, computers came along and all the fancy plugins and software and all that kind of stuff came along. But I've always used modular synthesizers to a greater or lesser extent in whatever project that I'm doing. Then a few years ago, I got this large Serge system, and I was patching up these self-playing patches. I don't know if you've mentioned, Ben, but we did actually have, which is going to start to confuse people, a tone science program on your show. Must be a year or so ago.
We did for your own release.
Like 2 or 3 years ago, I produced this album, which was just the one, this one here.
There we go.
Yeah, I produced this album of self-playing patches on the Serge. No reason other than I wanted to. I was doing all these structural pieces for the soundtracks where there's layers and layers of orchestras and the arrangement which goes into that, and also some of the other projects on DIN I was working with, either myself or other musicians, they were very much arranged in a DAW. And sometimes it's just nice for the modulars to do their thing. The trick is to actually produce an album's worth of tracks which stands on its own 2 feet. It's not just a series of demos or that kind of thing. It's actually tracks which stand on their own 2 feet, and an album which will play as an album. So I produced this album called Tone Science, like I said, DIN 49. This came out in, these aren't my normal glasses. Oh yeah, 2015. Anyhow, time moves on. That did quite well. It really confused some of my existing DIN customers, the ones who like the big Berlin School Tangerine Dream sequence kind of things, because there's none of that on there at all. It's all this self-playing, spacey, slightly strange. It's not that it's not harmonic. It is, but there's no real discernible tunes or whatever. And I got to thinking, and I remember Nigel's probably going to chip in here, we had a discussion about, wouldn't it be nice if I did an album like that again, but I invited other musicians who I knew were working with modular synths, and I would curate an album of their tracks. What should we call it, we said? Well, why don't we call it Tone Science? Because that actually fits in perfectly with the vibe of what we're trying to do. And
we had lots of bits of papers with
I
ideas.
wouldn't even tell you some of the names we came up with. Some of them probably, if you're under 18, you probably don't want to hear these. Or even if you're over 18. So I decided to do a project whereby I could curate an album's worth of tone science type tracks without actually me dictating to the composers and musicians involved what they were going to do. I didn't say, you have to do it in this style. It was just, it primarily had to be modular synthesis. And some people have come up with tracks that are quite raw, where it's just the modular's live to 2 tracks. Some people have come up with more of a film soundtrack mode, where they have actually composed layers and layers of sounds, and then they've actually put those in, but it's all done on the modular synth and things in between. Some of the tracks have got no beats and sequences on, and some have. My job was to create an album, again, which stood up on its own 2 feet and played as hopefully an entertaining CD or album to put on your player or streaming service or whatever. And so, yeah, that's where the whole tone science thing came from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, a question for you. We should say, for those that are watching live, and YouTube has just updated, I always say, if you're watching live, leave a comment. If not, comment later. The live chat for those watching or watching back post live stream, the live chat just scrolls down the right-hand side of that video now, which is quite nice. So they are, when I'm saying such and such in the chat room says this, everyone can see that, whether they're live or not. But I will say the same thing for those that are live. Come with some questions. Kyle, Gorilla Museum, regular in these live chats. Hello, Kyle. To you, Ian, he said, is it Silver Apples-esque? Morton Subotnick's Silver Apples-ish. What would you say to, I guess, for your original compilation, for your original album, I think he means?
Probably, I don't think so. My original Tone Science one, the Silver Apples, which obviously was a groundbreaking album at the time, I would say has a lot of events. There's lots of things going, lots of little pointillistic events. Robin's shaking his head saying, yes, so I must be in the right kind of area here. Tone Science is more stretched out. There were random self-playing patches, but the randomness is under control, of course. I was using scale quantizers. It's more kind of spacey, without being overtly space, kind of Tangerine Dream spacey. It's more got that kind of feel. Drift. Each of the 5 tracks on the original Tone Science drifts along. There's no real structure to them as such. Each track could have been 5 hours long. I just happened to choose about 12 minutes worth of each track. That was the only editing decision I had to make. I actually recorded about 20 to 30 minutes of each one. So whilst it would be nice from a marketing point of view to say it's just like Silver Apples of the Sun, it's not as pointillistic as that. It's more long stretched events with some of the tracks, a little more gestural things going on.
There's a lot more melodic content as well in it.
It's not melodic, but it's harmonic.
Harmonic,
each of the 5 tracks has a scale, quantizing or a mode. So, for example, one of them has a whole tone scale. I often go on about whole tone scales, one of my favorite scales, and that immediately gives it a certain 1950s B-movie sci-fi kind of vibe, that sort of lost in space kind of thing. Where I think Morton's is more, it's crazy. It's a crazy album, especially when you think when it was made. It's far out.
Yeah, more harmonious was my first response, and I think stretched out is perfect. Chris Myers in the live chat of Learning Modular. Hi, Chris. He's put more melodious than Douglas Leady's Entropical Paradise. He thinks that's a closer reference.
I'm not aware of that second one, so that's if anybody
it's a great album, is that?
All right, let's check it out.
First ever triple electronic album.
Right. I'm not too aware of that one either. I remember you talking about it though, Matthew.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's one of my favourites. Yeah, very cool.
And Robin, just while we're looking in the live chat, we just had someone asking if that scanner, he missed the introduction. It must be that New Zealand tan you mentioned.
Yes, it's fresh tan. You can't tell. I lost a lot of weight and I look healthy. I think I've said it before, but in my studio I have windows, so I'm one of the few artists that gets a suntan in the studio. So it is me. Hello.
Simming in the live chat as well, he said whole tone is the sound of the future from the 50s. I think that's...
Yeah, I don't know what it is about the whole tone. I mean, obviously, composer like Debussy, I think, used the whole tone quite a lot. It has a... The thing about a whole tone, you cannot resolve it. You can never, ever resolve a whole tone scale because there's no semitones. So whatever interval you play, it always has the same amount of tension. When you have semitones in a scale, different intervals have more or less tension, and that's how you can move the track around. Whole tone is just a suspended feeling because each of the notes is whole tone, one tone, no semitones.
The SMR is marvelous for composing whole tone stuff. It's wonderful.
Yeah, the spectral multiband, the 4
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yes, that's a good point, actually. I forgot that was in there.
Yeah, it's astonishing. It's very, very cool. I use that quite a lot. And on my track, I use that. I just did this whole tone kind of like drifting underneath some fairly heavily modulated strings, which are coming from the Morphogene. And it was just, I just had this moment where I was like, right, that's it. That's perfect. I'll just let that go for a few minutes. Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah.
Well, we'll go straight on to you, Nigel. So everybody here, myself included, is on the compilation, as well as a couple of others that couldn't make tone science. I'll quickly pull up the image for the release again from the DIM page. But yeah, Nigel, do you want to talk us through your track, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things...
What would be a nice way to start, I think, would be intention coming to the process, rather than... We'll talk about gear as well, and obviously that's a lot of what my channel's about. But yeah, you know, intention coming to the piece, I guess, is a nice place to start.
When I was composing the piece, it was something that I had an idea. I'd been really fortunate. I'd worked with some amazing musicians, and I'd worked with a quartet and a chamber orchestra, and I had about 4 or 5 hours left after the session to put some ideas down of my own, and I just ended up doing these heavily modulated drifting chordal pieces, and I had no idea at the time that I was going to use that as the foundation of, you know, composing a modular piece. But then I got a Morphogene, and that kind of just opened up lots of possibilities for me. It was I've worked with lots of musicians who record onto tape and then mess around with the tape, modulate the tape, put the tape through filters, record the output from the tape back into the DAW, back onto the tape, and just almost like, you know, destructive editing of the original material. And the Morphogene gave me that, you know, ability to do that. So what I wanted to do was to have a piece that was cinematic and very expansive, but had a lot of harmonic content as well. And you know, one of the ways that I did that was to, you know, modulate, you know, use some very precise voltage control of the pitch and lock a lot of the pitches in, so the strings were changing their chord structure, but I'd do that by modulating the mix. So the Morphogene reel would fade out. I'd send a modulated pitch control information and then fade it back up again. So you end up with one chord that's shifting and doing something very exciting and something modal. And then I had the SMR underneath, almost doing whole tone stroke shepherd tone kind of modulations, and it all came together. It was kind of, I was really pleased with the way that it worked out. And I did it again, the same approach to what happened with my 31-day challenge. I did it all in one take. There was nothing on a DAW. It was just patched up and performed. And I'm really fortunate. I've got a fabulous Tascam DSD master recorder. Straight into that. That was it. Track was finished. Done.
Perfect.
Very pleased with it. Yeah, it's good. It's a really exciting workflow for me because it's the antithesis of the stuff that I do professionally, doing stuff for TV and film. There's a tremendous amount of discipline in there, and often you're dealing with other creative professionals who have their own idea of what your material should sound like. So to be able to have that avenue as a writer, as a musician, to express yourself without limits, it's great. It's really good. And that's why I was so excited when I first heard the original Tone Science album that Ian did. It's still my favorite work that he's done. I love it. It's really cool. Because it was just, there was no formula to it. It was kind of out there, and it was a very like divisive release. A lot of people just didn't get it, but a lot of people that weren't switched on to the work of Din did, and it was really exciting. So it was great to see that progression from the original album to to an entire new sub-label. It's very good.
Yeah, you mentioned one thing that came to mind being a kind of gear focus channel for me. You mentioned the 4MS spectral multiband resonator.
Yes, yeah.
That's known, much like when clouds came out from Mutable Instruments or Elements, as kind of having a sound. Everyone that has one does the same thing, sounds the same way. And I think people passed them on, actually, the spectral multiband. The same with Elements. Elements came out, you could spot a file off in a patch.
I
don't think you can tell so obviously in your track. So what kind of environment? I mean, I know it's in the modular, but
it's kind of what I did with the SMR is I've got one of DPW's wave folder. So I actually took the SMR into the wave folder, so into two of the inputs, and then modulated the folding of the output of the SMR. So you get the tonal elements and the harmonic elements, but you get it's almost it's like a compression that's on the edge of breaking up. And then I took that out into it went into the Kameniac, the amazing Exo Chaos devices phaser, and had a really slow modulation on the phaser, and it was just this drifting expanse. And then, just to be extra cheeky, I threw it into the Asgard. Everything sounds good through that.
Yeah,
so
reverb.
It's kind of it's hard. Like you say, the SMR, it does have a very identifiable sound. It has its own character, and I'm listening to tracks and I go, that's just an SMR. So I had an objective to use it tonally, but to kind of break the character of the way it sounds. And plus I was using some of the envelope outs as well, which was kind of nice. So this whole, LFOs out of phase, just drifting in and out. So I've seen Robin do that a few times with the Batumi. It's just really, really nice.
Yeah, and I think the key thing you said there is putting it into something else, treating complex sources as if it's just a basic oscillator. Yeah, and saying this needs filtering, or it needs folding, or it needs processing through something else. Yeah.
I mean, when you get something that sounds so good, I can certainly see the reason why you'd go, oh, I love that, it's really great. But to me, it's not what Modular's about. Modular's about an adaptive process to the outputs. Do you want to put a filter on that? Do you want to fold it? Do you want to put that through some kind of modulation source other than its actual initial source? So yeah, it was a heck of a patch. I think I used pretty much all my cables. I ran out of cables.
Actually, we'll go just again. Kyle's popped up in the chat and said, "What was the starting point for us all with a track?" So before we get any further into any gear, we'll kind of go down for that. How about you, Robin? Starting point for your track on the release?
Same as it often is. No idea whatsoever what to do. Literally, I'm fortunate to have a generous amount of tools to play with. I stared at them and thought, as often, I don't use all of them. What can I possibly use? It began with IntelliJ Metropolis, which in a sense is the melodic engine. Yeah. As I always do, I literally just started playing around and see what I could develop with the faders, and never saved the sequence, and ran that sequence to a clock divider, and then split that up to 3 different VCOs. There was a further generator, there was the make noise STO, and something else. But goodness knows what it was. I honestly can't remember. It could have been the Piston Honda, possibly one of those things. It could have been a Verbos. It could be that. I honestly don't know. But it was about the moment. Often when I make these pieces, they're very much about the moment. What brought it together is I have this Spherfear radio module, which is connected up in the corner over here and just picks up live radio. And in a sense, that was the starting point. I started picking up these voices and thought, let me see what I can bring through this. And the melodic elements are introduced, and they're all slightly off-center to one another. So towards the end, the STO is playing this very low bass, kind of almost dubby underneath, but it's slightly off because it's being divided, the clock. So we've used, other colleagues here have used the term drifting, and it has a drifting quality to it. But I was very conscious of Ian's original invitation and of his recordings, and I wanted to make something that was sympathetic to the theme. I know historically I've been on many compilations over the years, and people often don't respect the desire of the person curating it. And I felt with this, having listened to it afterwards, it was a very successful curating, and all the artists respected what was needed for it in the sense of what was desired. So my piece is relatively simple. It's quite stripped back. It's quite drifting. It's quite melancholic, like lots of the pieces are that I do. Somebody once said that I'm quite cheeky and I'm quite funny. I say myself. And somebody said I'm so unlike my own work, which is generally quite serious. As I say, quite melodic, quite melancholic, and quite sort of touching in a way. What I wanted to do, I suppose, most of all, was I'm using these electronic instruments around me. I wanted to produce something that was very organic. And I think that's what I really enjoy about these tools in Modular, is the organic feel about it. And it's what Nigel touched on as well, which is the sense that you're within this as it's happening. When you work in Logic, Ableton, any DAW, you're often tidying things up. Obviously, you have a moment to rethink things all the time. What I love about these systems is it happens there and then mostly. And though I can now mix things down into 8 channels if I wish to, the majority of things that I've done are in stereo. And I enjoy capturing the moment. When I play live, that is about the moment. And I like to use the Modular with that same kind of sensibility, that it's, for me, very much about not tidying up, but seeing what I can capture at that moment in time. And it reflects that moment in time.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with that. Yeah.
You can all disagree.
I think it was one of the first pieces that came through was Robin's piece.
Yeah, I'm fast with deadlines always.
No, it was good. It was. I mean, we're going to continue. Obviously, each of us talking about this, but one thing that was quite astonishing was I had to curate the album, obviously, but when all the tracks started to come in, it was really obvious what the shape of the album was going to be. It was he was either luck or foresight, or people like Robin saying being respectful of what I was trying to do. But I didn't have to spend more than a couple of hours saying, right, this track goes first, which is Ben's, that track goes there, this, and then there was a shape and it went up like this, Chris Carter's, and it came down in Nigel's track and then Matt's. It was so easy to do.
I think me and Matt
had said it was really hard to do.
You should.
It was great.
Me and Matt had a really long conversation about how the order was it just plays beautifully. I mean, I know it's really kind of weird talking about something where you've submitted a track, it's your material. You don't want to sound too egotistical, but as an album, when I play it from the start to the end. It's like it's a process. I put it on and I play it until it finishes, and it's a joy to have something like that. It's wonderful when things conspire to create such a
it was planned this way.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, anybody would think it had been planned. It's very good.
It's funny. It reminds me of a conversation I had with a friend of mine. He said, "How many CDs can you go back to that you've got from the 90s and 2000? And have you ever listened to the tracks on the end of the album? How far did you get?"
Yeah.
And it's quite a funny thing. And I realized I've got so many albums and I probably have never heard the last 2 or 3 tracks because I never quite made it. And actually, I think one of my first comments when I first heard the album, it was sent as one file. And I remember commenting immediately, what an incredible listen it actually was, without sounding arrogant. That might sound a little pompous, but it's a very elegant and beautiful listen. It's something you really do want to listen to. And I feel like I'm a sales ad here, and I'm going to suddenly say, we really need this.
Just keep going. It's good. It's good.
Yeah, but it really is. I mean, I've heard a lot of, as we all probably are familiar with, a lot of music made with lots of different instruments. And the Modular can be a difficult beast to tame at times. And I think this is a beautifully put together album. And I have to say, full credit to make you blush, but I think, Ian, you know, you've done a fabulous job at curating it. Really, I think, you know, the way it's put together and the packaging. I mean, you know, just to embarrass Matt, but I think, you know, the packaging is phenomenal. Yeah,
oh, thank you.
It really is.
I'll pull that up again. The image of the packaging. Yeah, Matthew Shaw designed this. That's the day job, aside from Modular, we should say. But while we trying to embarrass you, Matthew, what was your kind of intention coming into the piece?
Yeah, well, I mean, as anyone who's listened to the show before, and we've spoken about each other's kind of compositions, I'm very heavily into auto-generative things, you know, self-playing patches. But for this one, I actually tried to take a slightly different approach to this. And I did this as if I was playing this live, where it was live in the studio. So I wanted to do something that was slightly different to my normal run-of-the-mill kind of approach, as it were. So, yeah, so I was basically using the Ditto 4 looper, which is like 2 loopers. And I was feeding sounds from my sort of Serge system into that. But I haven't mentioned it on the actual sleeve notes, but I was using an octatrack, but not for any sound. I was using it purely as a mixer. So I could queue up sounds on the Serge, as it were, in headphones, then mix those through, grab those in the looper, move on to the sort of second track. So it was only ever 2 tracks.
But always
so that's what I really liked about it.
Of each other.
And what's really good at what I really like about the looper pedal, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but it's really quite basic as well. But there's one great function on it. It has a decay knob for the looper. So 100% wet, it will always loop. But anything down from that will decay over time. So it's great for doing the kind of time lag accumulator style effects, or just really, really long loops that just really fade over time. So yeah, I was kind of, sorry.
Well, because I actually use the Boss DD20, which is quite an even simpler device than that, and I use the Boss DD20 just in that way, and that I have a long delay, effectively 16, 17, 18 seconds, but it doesn't keep going on forever. It slowly decays away. I quite like that. Then you can build up layers, but they actually do morph and things keep dropping out of audible range, and then more things come in. I quite like losing that in a similar way.
Yeah, it's like 90% feedback on a delay loop, isn't it?
Yeah.
I got, after speaking to Matt, I got the Boss one, and I love it. It's really good. That's the desktop Boss. I can't remember the model of it, but it's the one where you can actually stop and you can have a decay and you can program the decay. But it's like really nice built-in modulation as well. So it's very, very cool, very, very tape-like in its you know, principle and very flexible as well. Yeah. It's a good way of working. It's nice because just bouncing things. But I'm doing that with a Morphogene now. I've got 2 Morphogenes in one of my racks.
Yeah,
yeah. That's really cool. Just swapping backwards and forwards. It's just joyous. It's great. Yeah. Very cool.
So what with a Serge, Matthew, how are you keeping things kind of in key? Knowing your system, I don't think you've got anything quantized in there.
No, there was no quantization in there. It was just, like I say, it was purely just done by ear.
Tune by ear, cue it up.
Yeah, so I had kind of a sound palette that I was kind of working towards, you know, which was fairly unmelodic, as it were. But I was kind of, just purely headphones on, finding another appropriate sound that may go with or contrast.
Can I just ask you a question? Can I ask you a question, Matt? When you did your track, had you heard Ben's track?
No.
Because there's a certain poetic justice in this. Obviously, Matt and Ben doing their most excellent modular podcast, but of course, Ben's track was the first track of the album, and Matt's is the last track. In the bookend the album in a perfect way. So the fact either or neither of you had heard each other's tracks is even more a bit of serendipity, I suppose. That it was for me obvious to put Ben's track first and Matt's track last.
Yeah, this is why I keep going back to this thing about this. You know, it was almost like we'd all made this in the same room in a way.
We should pretend we did.
They're all.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I don't mean by the fact that they're all they sound the same. It was just that the listening path of this is definitely an album. It works entirely from start to finish. You know, like when most people hear the word compilation, they just think about, oh, well, skipping from this, or there's these 3 tracks and then the rest of it tails off. Or this just doesn't do it at all. You're just taken on a journey from start to finish, and it just, I think, really works superbly like that. And this is it. It's all the stranger when you do think, well, I didn't hear Ben's track, you know, and yeah, it just kind of flowed really well.
Yeah. What about you, Ian? Having done an album of this already, to compose a new piece, was it trying to kind of fire up a similar thing to what you did, or was yours done before or after?
I was a bit cheeky in a way. I was so busy getting everybody else's tracks. I don't know if you can recall, but when we did the original Tone Signs, you know, this one, I was on your show with Ben and a while back. When I did the original Tone Signs album, I actually attempted to write the patches down. I don't mean where the patch cables go, but I did a little shorthand. I've got a little shorthand way of knowing what goes where. And I think it was the 3rd track. Well, look at that. They're all the same title, just about. I think it was the 3rd track. When I did your show, I attempted to recreate that patch by going through my patch notes and patching the Serge and all that kind of gearing again. And I got the patch back, but it just didn't sound the same. So it just shows you there's so many little subtle things that you can put in the patch. You never ever can get it back. But I remember I had it playing in the background a couple of times, and I thought I quite like this. So I recorded like 20 minutes of it. So when we came to do the Tone Signs, the compilation album, I thought, well, I'll use that track because it's on the Serge, and it's kind of it reflects back to what I did in the original Tone Signs album, in which there was 5 tracks simply called Tone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So needless to say, this track's called Tone 6. And it's very raw. Probably mine's the rawest sounding of all the tracks, in that it's just the Serge doing his thing. All analog, although I think I may have used clouds this time, which I didn't use in the original. The original Tone Signs, I used spring reverbs and Booker Brigade delays. So I just thought it was wrong me doing a completely new track. I wanted to do a little reflection of where the compilation Tone Signs album had come from, which was my original Tone Signs project. That's my excuse anyhow.
I'll ask myself the same question, I guess. For me, it was, well, a couple of things, just tonally and compositionally, just headspace, just where I was at, just seemed to work, but exploring ideas of polyphonic patching and trying to keep things more interesting than a polysynth. I didn't want it to sound too in tune, and it is really quite in tune. But getting into this, I didn't want, I'll just recreate a poly on my modular, because you might as well go buy a polysynth if you're going to play and sequence in the same way. But trying to mix kind of generative work with performing a patch. So it was a case of, what do I want the modular to compose? What do I want to play? And my approach was that usually, you know, keys players, sequencers, people sequencing from a DAW, you do all the music work and maybe let the modular automate filter changes using random or sample and hold to shift waveforms and try and create interesting musical gestures on top of your playing. And for me, I thought I'll try and flip it the other way. I'll leave all music to chance, let the modular compose that, but I will control the tones quite specifically in terms of I have a little performance skiff with a joystick and pressure points, I think, was in there at the time, and VCAs and knobs and a couple of those light strip touch faders. And it was a case of, what do I want to control? What's the machine going to do? So it was a case of using attenuated sample and hold to make all the tonal changes, all the pitch changes, into the Instruo Harmonig. And I'll pull an image up because for me, I think that's the most kind of puzzle of my patch. The Harmonig is a 4-voice, well, it's a single voice quantizer, but with 4 outputs. Really intelligent musical piece of kit. Takes an input. You can punch the scale in at the bottom. It's called natural minor sines because it's primarily sine waves and it's a natural minor scale. I don't tune the modular to anything pretty much ever. other than what I feel like it should be. I pitch the first oscillator, and for me, that's usually good enough. Obviously, if I'm playing with other things, I would have to tune it to something. So it's just a natural minor scale punched in the keyboard at the bottom, and that gives me a root, third, fifth, and seventh to create a 4-voice chord. You can quite intelligently shift out of key if you want that to be diatonic or not in terms of musical terms. You can invert the chords, which is reordering the notes, but keeping the notes the same for that chord tone. And you can open up the voicing so they're spread across octaves, pull them back. And that playing into 4 oscillators and then into 4 VCAs as a kind of basic polyphonic thing was where it went. That was drifty, and as Nigel said, having the tip-top reverb, for me, is just gorgeous. Sitting anything in that Halls of Valhalla reverb, you lose an evening just to this drifting niceness that reverb is. And I wanted something else, so I ended up patching up drums, which aren't that apparent from the track. But then I was playing around with some granular delays. They were on the Erica Synths Pico DSP. And I was just using VCAs to control the feed into it to create some noise and texture. And the sine waves felt a little clean to me as part of the process. It felt too just, because the chords are quite narrow, there's no kind of bass pinning it down. It felt like I was only in the midpoint of the spectrum and not really doing much else. So that's where drums came in. I thought maybe a little bass drum underneath and maybe a hi-hat pinging away, but it didn't really work because the kind of second key bit compositionally was, I've spoken about this quite a lot recently, decoupling the rhythm element from the pitch element. So in a basic sense, if I was to sequence it, every new note would happen on a step and I'd have a gate pattern or a clock to make that happen. My oscillators went into VCAs just with free running LFOs. And again, very much just by feel. So just listening to one of the oscillators and just adjusting an analog LFO's rates until it just kind of bit of ebb and flow and just kind of felt right. Same for the second, third and fourth ones. And the whole thing just drifts in and out. So instead of this single 4-voice chord tone, they are all individual, just pushing and pulling, not in sync, not in phase, no relation to each other, just free running LFOs.
I got a harmonic after I'd done the track, and it's the center of all the really epic pitched kind of modulated chordal work that I'm doing. It's just so good. That's your fault. You turned me on to that. It's just amazing. It's so good, and I love the fact that I can play it as well. So yeah. You know, that's just again, you know, in a little skiff with the pressure points, just to be able to change it around on the fly and how it feels. It's great. It's really good.
So in some ways, Ben, from what you've just been saying there, there's lots of similar processes in your track than what I did with the Serge stuff. Were you influenced at all in your choice of composition and what track you were going to do? Because obviously you had a copy of my original Tone Science. Were you influenced to try to get close to that style, or did it turn out like that?
It definitely crossed my mind in that when you said, because it's an album that I enjoy listening to, as Ian said, we should say how, you know, that album is a catalyst for this now sub-label of Din. It's great, just straight away, it just caught me that each piece is, you know, this is a harmonic minor and I'm going to work in this framework, this is a whole tone piece. I did go back and listen to the album, and I think it was very much part of that and trying. At first it was a kind, because I'm well aware of the fact that unlike, say, you, Robin, Nigel and Ian, me as kind of DivKid is this entity that puts out music gear reviews. And it was a bit of a, yeah, I should do some music again.
Oh, you've got enough gear.
Well, exactly, yeah, I should know how to use the stuff. It's been a long time, certainly publicly. I've got a lot of content building at the minute, but I'm going to probably put an album out later this year with a similar thing to this theme.
I think about a year ago I was in your studio, Ben, and I was saying, dude, you're gonna have to get some stuff out, man. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Get some stuff out.
Yeah, well, there's all it's strange because doing the demos kind of scratches that itch. I think, you know, for me, and I don't mean with any kind of ego, people might not like it, but for me, I find these little riffs I find satisfying and kind of patch up these mini pieces, almost like an etude or a study of something. And that kind of satisfies the output. I don't feel like the gear demo is just so technical that there's nothing creative. Those little patches kind of scratch that itch. And I thought, yeah, I should do something long form, and completely intentional, I think, is the thing for me. It felt like it should be about that instead of I'm composing a mini thing to show off a feature of a filter. Or
here's another question for you on your piece. You said you used 4 voices, 4 sine waves. Were they all from different VCOs? Because I've got a second part of the question, so I want to know what you say first about this.
It was, if I remember right, I pulled some notes up on that. 4 IntelliGel Dixies.
You got 4 of them. That's actually quite and it's not what I've seen in most people's racks. They'll have VCOs, but they won't have the same VCO. They may have my little rack that I use live, for example. I've got a DPO, a Braids, and an E350 in there. 3 different VCOs, all with different kind of sounds. One of the joys about using something like my Serge system is, although I've got 2 pairs of VCOs, 2 of the NTOs, 2 of the PTOs, they actually sound the same. One of them has actually got a morphing waveform, the other one doesn't. But I can actually get 4 voices. Same with the 100M sitting behind me. I can create a patch where the raw material, the notes, the VCOs are the same basic sound, which I can then morph and treat. But if you use different VCOs, you won't get the same feeling as the polyphony which you manage to get because you're using 4 VCOs which were the same, if you see what I mean. I don't think many people have that these days. Most people tend to mix and match modules so much.
I've just seen, I've got kind of 2 sides of A4 of notes. I've already posted this up for Patreon supporters, but if anyone wants it, they're welcome to the notes. It was an Instro Troika, which is a triple oscillator, and a Livewire AFG as the 4th voice.
All right.
So I guess a similar thing. I
love the Troika. I love the Troika. It's a great.
Yeah, on that same card, that's my main focus for that, the E370. Because the morphing wavetable stuff just adds so much, and then to be, I mean, it's big, but it's not big in 4 E352s. To be able to just say, here's 4 more complex voices, that's currently where album production is, if you like. I'm trying to get a 12U case together that will be both a live case. I've agreed to perform an hour at a festival in end of June, Deershed Festival. A kind of ambient sound bath, if you like, probably Sunday morning chill out after heavy night on the Saturday at a festival. I'm trying to build a case around this to kind of just do that and get all these ideas down, because the system's too sprawling to work with that way. You know, pulling the thing I want is 4 rows away, and
you see the point I'm making, though, that most people these days don't seem to have. They seem to forget VCOs. They're all dotted about. They're all different VCOs, and there's something quite nice in having 3, 4, or more voices which are effectively the same VCO voice, and that gives a consistency to the sounds that are coming in and out. You can modulate them all, of course. They're just a raw, basic material. But I quite like starting with 4 or 5 or more oscillators, which are all basically the same, and then you do your patch based on those.
Yeah, I think, well, it's a completely different tone, isn't it? And I used to, when I didn't have any polysyms and didn't want to use software, I'd use an SH09 Roland keyboard, and I'd multi-track 4 times. And it also, I think it also, having them separately, not with this quantizer, because I let the modular do that kind of decision making on harmony and melody for this piece, but doing it separate, it almost feels like writing for a string quartet. When you think, I'm going to record 4 things on the same piece of kit, like the same collective voice. If you were to multi-track it as opposed to how I did, I think, for me at least, I feel like I compose better lines. If I'm presented with a keyboard where I can play 4 notes, I'll block chord my way through, and I don't tend to work as well. Which is why, another reason why I wanted to just let the modular do the decision making. Because if I was to play it, I could have got Logic to sequence it, no problem. It would have sounded very different, definitely very different.
However you did it, when I first heard your piece, before I had even heard all the pieces, I thought that's probably going to be the first piece of the whole album.
Brilliant. Well, whatever.
The obvious.
And I think finding a kind of sonic bed for me to work in was important, and that was that Halls of Valhalla reverb.
It's marvelous.
Yeah, finding a kind of palette for me to sit in is for me, the tone's kind of as important as the pitches generally in this. It's just, again, where my head's at. I may say different in a couple of months.
Big up Mr. Costello, the king of reverbs.
Yeah, Sean Costello.
He's just amazing.
Yeah. But there's a ton of modules on the track, not more than's needed. I think it's an efficient patch, but a hell of a lot of VCAs, having all those scratchy vinyl noises coming in and out.
Yes, good.
VCAs pre and post granular delay, and whether they were going into an echophon or the reverb first or both ways. And I multi-tracked it just to kind of finish off my patch, unless people have questions, either you guys or the live chat. But I multi-tracked the whole thing, an experiment in I've got 8 tracks, let's see what happens. And it was just a very gentle amount of nudging. Don't think I used any compression, maybe rolled some low end off the reverb. And it just felt nicer for me to kind of perform without worry of, is this mix right or not? It was a safety net, if you like.
Yeah, again, you mentioned about compression and stuff there. Obviously, one of my jobs was to get all the tracks to fit together. When I actually came to master the album, to be honest, there wasn't really a lot I needed to do. There was a couple of volume changes on a couple of the tracks just to get the levels to sit right. But in terms of having to master, what was it, 9 different tracks from 9 different artists, there wasn't really an awful lot to do, which again was a great.
Usually that would have been quite a task.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that I love about the album. The production's at such a high level. Not just the composition, and the sound design. Just everything sounds so good.
Can I ask then about the artwork? Because nobody's asked Matt about the artwork, actually. What was the inspiration for that?
My sort of passion really is I really like geometric abstraction. That's it's one of those kind of, again, ties in with like little modular things in a way that you can start off with a small seed of an idea or a very simplistic form, and then just do little kind of mathematical changes to something, be it a rotation, an angle change, but starting with very small ingredients like a line or a circle. And that's very much what I like that as a discipline. I'm very much influenced as well by a Swiss designer called Joseph Muller-Bruckmann. He's a big influence on my work. And but yeah, basically it came from a geometric abstraction idea. But I thought that obviously ties very well in with the kind of modular thing. I didn't want it to be overtly modular in look, as it were, either cables or modules themselves. I wanted it to be in a nod of a kind of, that you stare into something, into another world, and you're not quite exactly sure if there is an overt visual tie-in with it immediately.
You say no images are modular, Matt, but I think that's a sneaky little image of is that your Serge?
No, that's the Serge over in Stockholm.
Yeah.
The EMS. I was very lucky to go on last summer.
One of the things, obviously Matt and I had a chat about the cover and stuff. And one of Matt's ideas, which you haven't mentioned, Matt, you said you wanted to reference the sort of 1950s, 1960s school science books kind of vibe.
Sorry, just one decade out. Yeah, the 60s and 70s science books I remember when I was at school were a massive influence on me. And again, they were very much geometric abstraction in their kind of design. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously it was a nod to the thing that the kind of music that we do, and particularly the equipment that we use, is very technical in nature. So it was that kind of like little pseudo science nod, if you like, again, without having pictures of chemistry labs on the front.
Yeah.
Like that. But it was very much that kind of idea. I don't know if, you guys remember those kind of books from school, these kind of very almost austere looking, what's this thing here?
I'm trying to find some amazing textbooks. I'm not having much luck.
I've got
a
folder full of about 1,000 images I collated together when I was doing the research for the project.
Wow, as many as that. Well,
yeah.
I mean, the whole name as well, tone science, reflects the fact, the science part, that a lot of the gear that we use has a very scientific quality to it. But I always want to stress the musical side of things, hence the tone, I suppose, is a way of looking at it. For me, a lot of people, when I've talked to people at shows and stuff, very surprised to learn. I have no idea how these things work inside. I can't even solder a jack plug. It's a bit like when I drive a car. I've got no interest in how the engine works. I just want it to take me somewhere nice.
Yeah.
So the music side of things is always, for me, the most important thing. And I think the cover and everything kind of brings it together, where I think that is the case. Even if you're not into modular synthesizers, it doesn't matter. The album will stand up on its own.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think without you trying to, you've covered nearly every format of modular synth though across the release. That
was just by chance as well. Although I don't think there's any big Moog on there. I try to get my partner in crime in ARC, Mark Shreve, to be on there, but I didn't manage to persuade him. Otherwise, I could have had a large 5U Moog playing.
I know there's Hordike, there's some Metasonic stuff, obviously Eurorack, Serge. Is there some Buchla on there as well, if I remember right?
Yes, there is.
System 100, is that on yours? No?
A little bit on mine, yeah.
So you're ticking the boxes.
It was purely by chance, purely by chance.
Again, that's another one of those amazing accidents, isn't it? The fact is that you couldn't almost plan this out, to say, oh, I need some artists and I want them all to have different systems.
I don't think it would have worked out as well. I think if it was a case of it being about the gear, well, I know you've got Serge, so you do that because Ben's going to do Eurorack, so Nigel,
exactly.
Yeah, that would have been too contrived, I think. I think that's putting the gear first and not the actual compositions first. So that for me is the wrong way around. It's just coincidental. That was a nice representation of quite a lot of systems on there.
Yeah.
The gear amongst us.
Yeah, I think a big thing for me is working with samples in Euro, because I've never done it before. Something that I've never had in my work.
That's a whole new approach, of course. Yeah. I mean, what a modular can now do, of course, is a lot different to what it could do a few years ago.
Of course.
Being able to play about and manipulate samples in real time in the modular is a whole new field of exploration.
It is, as long as it sounds good.
Well, that's always nice, as always good.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of the live chat and things, I just want to remind people if you've got any questions, fire away. That's definitely something I'd like to touch on with everyone as we kind of, look to wrap up in the not too distant future. But any questions in the live chat, fire away. We'll try and answer them all. The samples in Euro thing's an interesting one, and it's one that I've wondered how I might incorporate samples into this going forward and wanting to work in a kind of album. What's anyone else's approach to that for similar pieces to this or for their own work moving forward? Is it a kind of specific avenue anyone's exploring?
I think for me personally, the temptation to use samples, I have to make sure that the content is key. I don't want to use anything that's too overproduced. Like I'm sampling voices and then just using that as an extra level of manipulation. I know a lot of people that are using samples with sample manipulation in Euro. I'm already thinking that just sounds too overproduced. That's a full track flown in there, and it's kind of sounding like an octatrack, which is cool. There's a place for that, but it's not my particular workflow. My samples I like to be transparent enough to be able to sit in the mix, and also harmonically interested enough to dictate the way the track develops. So I'm working with a lot of I gave Ben some piano that I'd recorded for some Morphogene reels, and I've got some quartets that I've recorded, individual instruments, thumb pianos, and I tend to have them fairly kind of hidden within the mix, so they're not pushing everything. I know Ian uses his little tape. Is it an AM radio you use, Ian?
Yeah, well, I was going to make that point, because samples doesn't necessarily mean samples from a sample.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Robin, obviously, as a scanner, you're well known for getting radio broadcasts, which are effectively live samples.
That's right. Yeah,
coming through. Yeah. And I do that as well. I have a little, have this little my little radio that I use.
Yeah.
When I play live, and I just put it through ring modulators and stuff, and I never quite know what's going to be playing on there.
That's what I'm doing with the
lives.
Yeah. With the Morphogene, I'm actually sampling in real time, and I've just created some buses in the mixers that I'm using, and I just fire something through. It could be just like just a single voice or an effect or even feedback, and then I sample that into the Morphogene and then manipulate that. So I'm sampling the patch. And often, that's kind of, it gives me a bit more focus on what I'm trying to get across insofar as the music, the interpretation of the music, and so it works really well. I love the Morphogenes; it's just fantastic. So
everybody seems to have a Morphogene these days, apart from
everybody. Yeah.
So, Robin, going back to your use of found sounds, you've been doing that since. I don't know when. A
long time. Since I was about 11, actually.
Yeah, but that's in a way live sampling in a way.
It is.
Yeah, I think when the radio music, radio music came out a few years ago, I think it came out and it kind of shifted a way that people thought about modular, actually, in many ways. It suddenly offered the ability to bring in voices and sounds that you couldn't ordinarily make or create. What I like with it is putting it completely random. I fill a machine. I also use the qubit wave. I use that in performance, and I fill it with sounds. Wow. There's been a few comments on the video that's on Ben's site where I'm playing live in Leeds, and there's a piece of paper next to me, and I just as an experiment, I thought I'd write down a list of the samples that are on this machine. I never looked at it once. I completely forgot, because I like to just randomly throw these things in. I fill it up with voices and recordings of water, walking in Lithuania through the forest, wherever it may be. I just love these sounds. They have meaning for me. And I love mixing this very organic real world randomly with something that's it's kind of artificial. It's kind of electricity. The organic versus the kind of artificial in some ways. I love to bring these two worlds together, the kind of digital, the organic, the analog, with the very real world, and kind of lose track of what's real and what's not real. So samplers for me have been very exciting. I mean, there's the new Qubit Nebulae 2 should be coming out, and that should be quite exciting when that emerges quite soon. There's all kinds of things in the pipeline, I know, by other manufacturers, and if it's contained enough. But I think Nigel has a valid point, which is if you're just playing back a track through a song, there's nothing wrong with that by any means. But it's a shame, because you could do that ordinarily in another way. I mean, I'm not one to judge what anybody does, but I think the joy of these systems is the discovery of it, and it's the worlds of sound that emerge that you never quite anticipate. I know when I sit down at the keyboard, my fingers fall in a particular way on particular notes, and they can't escape from having learnt piano when I was a teenager and always trying to unlearn those things. But with these systems, I have to always relearn them. I am one of those people, as guilty as many others, that I've watched Ben's videos for ages, and it teaches me a lot about modules I've got already. I discover things thinking, it really does that? I didn't realize it had this extra function. I've got them all downloaded. I've got them all on this laptop here. So when I travel, I can actually watch them in my hotel rooms if I'm bored.
You're fun boy, yeah?
I should pay you as my offline backup.
Good point.
How much, Robin? Certainly and I'll link the video and all the things we've talked about. We'll link in the description, as well as the top link in the video description now, live and coming back to this just on YouTube, is the release. I should say, go buy the release. We're also going to do a giveaway. I've got 5 albums to give away, download codes. With it being Easter weekend, it's been a little quiet, and I've had a couple of things, let's say, hit the fan this weekend. So what I will say is, if you tag me anywhere, put hashtag Tone Science at DivKid, on YouTube, on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And I'll pick another random one from one of those. I'll just randomly pick people and send the codes out. So go post #ToneScience and just make sure you at me so that I actually see it on those platforms, and I'll give some copies away.
Cool.
What I wanted to ask you, Robin, how much are you curating what goes into these samplers live? Because I've had a lot of fun recently with the Morphogene, as Nigel brings that module up, both with Nigel's piano playing and Matthew's rusty glockenspiel.
That's marvelous. That.
but making sure that I had about 10 parts from Matthew and picking the one that seemed to fall. I think the intervals were always about a minor third apart or a tone or 2 tones apart. So it's not going to clash too much. So for me, that felt like a safety net of, well, I can just freely, modulate through this, and I'll always be at least a tone or so away. So I'm not going to get any really horrible clashes or dissonance. Are you deliberately putting things in key, or that are just
It's not a lot of tonal material, actually. Yeah, there's a lot of percussive sounds. There's a lot of very abstract sounds. There's radio noises. There's all manner of things that I've recorded over the years. They're kind of, in a sense, my voice. And that's been quite important in some ways to sort of bring in and just sit underneath the surface, but not that much tonal stuff. And when there is, I just cross my fingers and hope it's kind of working with what I'm working with at that moment. But having said that, that's the exciting thing about performing. We've all largely played with real instruments, and you play with a band and suddenly a string will break or an instrument goes out of tune. If you have the time and the commitment, it's worth searching for one of my favorite videos online of Van Halen live. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, where they play Jump.
Oh, the Yossel.
It's been deleted off YouTube for some time, but it's embedded on somebody's site, and it's worth searching for something like Van Halen Jump Bad, because basically they whoever made the mix, it seems, of the keyboard sound has rendered it at something like 48 instead of 44.1. So it runs at the wrong speed. I've never seen anything so extraordinary as the band starts, and it's this euphoric moment in a stadium, and there's this gigantic inflatable microphone that Dave Lee Roth is embracing in a very sexual way. And it falls apart from there, because when the guitar solo comes in, it's because there's no way you can bend a note to fit into those tones. So it doesn't work. It is the most nightmarish
it's painful.
ever imagined. So anything I ever do, when it goes wrong, I can only compare it. I'm not going to be playing in a stadium. It's not going to be going that far wrong. But honestly, for the joy of it, search for it.
There's a similar clip of Jar and his oscillators start to drift. Yeah, and that's it's heartbreaking. It really is, because he's just like, what am I going to do now? And it's just, oh no.
But in some ways, it's the joy of live music.
That's
how live music works. And sometimes things work and sometimes they don't. And that's the moment.
There's no such thing as mistakes in music. No. There's no mistakes at all. That's something that's fundamental.
There's only grace notes.
Only grace notes.
Is it the old jazz joke? If you play a bum note, just play 2 or 3 more times to pretend you're meant to play it.
Yeah.
There's a question here for you, Robin, and we'll look to close this out in a couple of minutes. So really, last chance for any questions. Owen J, for you, Robin, said, did you use Modular on your early albums like Spore and anything from that kind of era?
No, in 1992, the first and second Scanner albums, the second one with the inspirational title Scanner 2, which came out in Ash International. The first one was all recorded on a Fostex 4-track. The 280 4-track tape recorder. The next one was recorded again onto a tape recorder, but what I used was a VCS3 and put all the sounds through it. So what you hear are lots of radio voices and things I picked up on a radio scanner and around me that are manipulated through a borrowed VCS3. And I've told the story before, but in 1992-93, I was offered this machine to buy. It was £150. I said no, because I never had £150 to buy such an elaborate machine. And nor did I live in a place where I actually had any space to put such a thing. I mean, unfortunately, the frustration of having no money, no space. And do I regret it? Answers on a postcard. No, of course I don't. No, but yeah. So I was using machines in those times. Spore was recorded largely with Roland JV1080 and a Quasar synth, the Quaddy MIDI, yeah, at the time. So, which in fact I just bought back off someone a while ago. So, in fact, it's one of those moments you start rebuying things back. You think, JV1080, what a great machine that was. I bought one for about £80 a year ago because I thought, I love this machine. I really
C20 longing, patch C20 longing. Oh, it's like
I also regret some of my space tech got the RE501. I should never have sold that.
No, that's a bad move.
As it's modular, but my channel, someone has asked, sorry, I forgot the name as the live chat's pinged up. Favorite module, or let's give that a musical tinge as well. Favorite approaches or uses of a particular module. I'll kick things off and play into the hype. Marbles from Mutable Instruments, the new random mod. It's called Random Sampler, which I think is really thrown people. Not an audio sampler. But Chris Meyer made the great point, answering someone on Facebook earlier, that sample and hold's been around longer than samplers have. So it's a fair name. Yeah, I've had to contain my excitement for this for a good few months. It takes the best part for me of lots of modules, so that there's a timing side, which is free outputs, and a CV-based side, which is free more. And the first mode on the timing side is like branches, which is a coin toss, and you can weight the probability as to which output the gate will come from. And I find that's great for letting the machine kind of decide when, say, a hi-hat will be closed or open, or whether a sound will be accented or not. It then does the great thing that Matthew loves, and I think this is the only device to do this. The second mode is like the qubit nanorand, where it's a random gate, but the random gates shift between musical divisions and multiplications of the time. So you might get an 8th note triplet and then a 16th note, or a fast 30-second note, or quarters or halves or nothing. It will rest, and really musical. Great for anything from adding little flurries to Tangerine Dream-esque sequences with that kind of rhythmic ratchet, or more kind of burst and frantic IDM kind of chopped up beat stuff. And then the third mode is very much like grids, and it follows what you'd call, or certainly what I'd call as an acoustic drum kit player, linear beats, where usually across bass drum, snare drum, hi-hat, drummers like David Garibaldi in Tower of Power or any of those kind of funk bands would only play one of those instruments at once, and the whole groove is the way they play off each other but never hit together like a kind of standard beat. And that's I find that really great for clocking sequences as opposed to it just being drums. And then the CV side is, it will quantize to anything. You can play notes in and it will learn the notes that you've played and how many times you've played the notes, which ones are more important than others. And over all of this random, it effectively straps a Turing machine lockable looper on top. And you can, much like Matthew's feedback on the looper fading out over time, you can have it locked perfectly, either the timing based side or the CV pitch based side. Well, it doesn't have to be pitch, but variable CV. You can just have like a 10% chance a new random note will come in. So for these really slow drifting musical textures, it's really good. So that's it for me. We'll fire down the line as a final question, I guess, for that. Even favourite approach of a favourite module of the minute, Robin?
Of the minute, no idea of the minute. I just actually got a U Clouds, which I'm looking forward to playing with, which is the miniature version of Clouds. I just literally put it into my live case, so I'm looking forward to playing with it. Haven't had a chance really to, there's so many different variations. I've got the Magpie one, which allegedly is the best, not the best, but recommended because you can update the firmware. There's other ones where you can't update the firmware. So even though I have the grown-up Clouds, I have the small one because I like the joy of using it live, and it's so tiny it sits into a live case comfortably.
Yeah.
difficult question.
It is a difficult question.
Yeah.
I didn't want the gear to be too. I mean, we can't escape it for what this channel is and why some of the people are here. But I didn't want the gear to be too much of the focus. But I do have one extra closing question. Then we'll call it on the chat. But Nigel, favourite module or favourite approach?
Batumi. All day
What's
long. Yeah. I think the thing that I love about the Batumi is it's just having that flexibility of. I mean, the alternate, the advanced firmware is wonderful. You know, the random is just glorious. I've got 2 in my little mobile rig, which I took to Ian's last week, and it's just having just the simple thing, just the sliders, just being able to just slide in a value on the Batumi is just joyous, and you can. You can zoom in, you can get really precise with the with the LFOs, and I use it for pretty much all my modulation. I've got 2 Batumis, 2 potties, and that's kind of me sorted. Very simple, very easy to use, no menu diving. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, that's a good line. You've got 2 potties. I like to hear somebody say, "I have 2 potties."
Yeah, I was waiting for that. Yeah, I do. When I get locked in the studio, having 2 potties is really
yeah.
So.
Matthew, if you're still there, you popped up twice. There was 2 of you at one point.
Yeah, the internet came back on my computer, so it was fighting for it. Of course, at the end of the show.
Favorite module or approach at the minute?
Which format?
Any format.
Well, in Euro, Telharmonic module, Serge dual slope generator. That's it.
Yeah,
choice. Yeah.
Ian, having just moved, I guess this is quite a potent question.
I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use the VCS3. I'm going to pretend the VCS3 is a whole module.
Oh man,
there's a trick on the VCS3 that is so easy to do on the VCS3. It's true feedback. I don't use any oscillators. I can make the filter on the verge of self-oscillation feedback on itself, and you get these incredibly amazing tones. It's almost like a trumpet playing at times. I think Nigel knows some of the samples.
It's amazing. It's just
never, ever, even just looking at it can sometimes change the sound. that balance, and it's the total unpredictability. If the weather changes outside, it will change. But it's this true feedback, the output back to its own input. So I think there's only about 2 pins, no oscillators, and this weird, amazing brass-like trumpety tones come out. It's fantastic.
I have VCS3 envy.
I think part of that as well is when Finlay, Future Sound Systems, was developing his pin matrix, and it was originally passive, but you can tag on an active board and have a fully buffered, great per octave pitch pin matrix. He was saying a lot of the greatness with the VCS3, and I imagine that's what's happening there, Ian, is that it's passive. So and the signal can potentially flow both ways and interfere with it.
Yeah, I mean, the ring modulator as well on the VCS3 has 2 inputs and 1 output. So what I do is, rather than putting an oscillator into A and B, I put the oscillator into A and I put its output into B. And the volume up to a certain point, nothing happens. And then suddenly at a certain point, it just screams. And it just tears itself apart. It's an incredible sound. It's an angry kind of tearing, and you can't get it. I've never been able to get those sounds.
The voice of the Daleks.
In any of the formats. So I love the VCS3 would be the last thing out of my studio. It'd be the last thing out.
Don't tell me you bought it for £150 in 1992.
Well, actually, Robin, it was £350, including the keyboard. I actually did buy it in 1993.
Very final question from Barlow. We touched on this a little bit, but we'll quick fire down the line for this one. What's everybody's recording chain for audio interface mixers, DAW? For me, it's a module, the Praxis Snake Charmer. It takes 8 modular inputs, gives me 8 balance lines out on a DB25, a bit like an overblown VGA cable if you've never seen a DB25. And that breaks out on a snake cable into 8 XLRs, and I just recorded all 8 parts. Well, I think it was 6 for this. Into Logic, my DAW. What about you, Robin?
Exactly the same. From your recommendation, I think I bought the same thing. For this track, it was going through the IntelliGel Mutamix, which most of my mixes do, but actually I bought the very same Praxis because it's such a beautifully simple, clear way of working, actually. Very, very, very high quality and very easy.
Yeah. What about you, Nigel? You were 2-track.
Yeah,
right?
for 2-track, it's basically it's straight out from my modular into I've got an SSL XL desk into my SSL X rack. I've got a stereo bus compressor and a stereo EQ, and then straight into the Tascam, which is a DSD recorder, the DVRA 1000, for multi-tracking into an Apollo 16 and straight into Pro Tools. Sorry,
I was just going to say, how much did the stereo compressor EQ get touched?
Very, very fragile amounts of EQ and fragile amounts of compression, because I wanted it to sound raw. And I think the temptation is you can just sweeten up the bottom end and just maybe just roll a little bit off on the top. But I just kind of locked it in. It was mainly on the compression. You know, the great thing about having the bus comp is you can just set it, and you can grab a pot and change it as your mix is going, and it's not reactive. It's very smooth. So that's an extension. The X desk is kind of an extension of my modular. It works really, really well and sounds amazing. I mean, so much headroom. I mean, it's beefy as anything. And I like to record the modular. You know, if it's not for a commission, or if I'm not going to be remixing or editing in it or putting it into other projects, I just straight into the X desk, my bus comp and my EQ and my XL rack, and then into the Tascam, and that's it. I love that. I love that workflow. It's so nice because I like recording onto tape, and it's kind of as near as I can get it without having a huge Revox in the studio.
Yeah, and not having a computer even on.
Not having a computer on. Don't even have the computer on. It's just great.
What about you, Matthew? Were you mono, or were it out of the Octatrack in stereo?
No, I was just using that as a little as like a headphone mixer, to be honest. It was the Serge was just straight into the Moto Ultralight.
Yeah.
But like Robin, in Euro, I had a Mutamix for my kind of output needs, if you like.
Yeah.
But the Serge, again, was just very simple because it was direct into the effects, and then the effects into the Ultralight.
Yeah, simple. What about you, Ian? Recording for modular stuff?
Well, yeah, the Serge, the stereo output from the Serge is very high. The quality is very nice. I just come straight out of the Serge into, I'm looking at the model, a TLA82, which is a tube compressor and EQ, just like a stereo front end, and then into me from there to the Apollo UAD. And the Dofer stuff, that's Schweman. Is it the MX4S, the mix I use there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's just fairly straightforward, to be honest. I try not to colour the sound too much. I mean, the sound I try to get as close to the sound I want with the gear before I actually put it through anything else.
Yeah, done at source. I don't know if that's why Barlow asked in the chat, but I think I see the question come up a lot, and it's really simple, the recording modular thing for me. Last point I'll make before I say bye to everyone. You know, just plug a sine wave, because a sine wave's so pure, you will hear if it distorts or clips. Yeah. Just plug it into whatever your normal interface is. It will clip or it won't. It won't break anything straight away. If it's not clipping, and that oscillator will go straight in. You don't need an output module. It doesn't have to be a VCA at the end. Perfect. You know, it will just record. A lot of gear, only seemingly very, very cheap gear these days, has such low headroom that you can't work with modular at all. If it's too hot, you know, throw it in a VCA or an attenuator, just drop it a little bit, even passively, and you should be good to go. But use a sine wave or an oscillating filter for a really clean tone, and it's obvious then if it's clipping or not.
Yeah.
So
perfect. Go by Tone Science.
Yeah.
I'll put it up on screen one final time. Any closing messages from anybody?
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
What can you say?
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, everyone, in the live chat. Do leave a comment, either watching this live and we missed it or not. I'll be sure to ask any of these people or answer myself if I can. Links will go in the description when I edit the video after the stream. Thanks for watching. Cheers, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
See you now.